We are not alone. We have also Donna. We also have Jonathan. We have Jesse as well. I don't know, Jesse, if you're feeling good enough. So we are turning a bit into a sort of hospital now because Jonathan just got diagnosed with COVID yesterday. How are you feeling, Jonathan?
A little bit rough around the edges, but I can pull through.
Thank you very much for sticking with us. And Jesse, you have your daily dose of allergies.
Yeah, usually typical when I wake up.
But
And
feeling
I'm cold.
Still around. Love the sweatshirt, Donna.
I'm cold and I'm in Melbourne, and so I went and put all my clothes on. But
There you go.
this is an old Optimal Workshop logo. There's
wow, that's old.
Well, let's see the back of it. Everybody can walk down the street.
Very nice.
Very
It's my
nice.
next skin hoodie. See? And then I found my Rosenfeld Media hat as well. I cannot tell Lou that it is my painting hat. But it's a very good painting hat and keeps paint and plaster out of my hair.
Very nice. So with that, I'll also sort of show up our sponsors one last time. So we have Sakai, who is sponsored us. Sorry, give me 1 second. I think I have too many things open.
That was me, I think.
We also have Optimal Workshop. We have Overflow. We have Rosenfeld Media. UX Testing. Axure. UXBA International. We have Overflow already. We have Whitespace. And last but not least, we have you. So thank you very much for buying a ticket or just joining us, coming through some kind of discount that we had. We're really, really happy to have you, to have had you here. Hopefully you were here throughout the 24 hours. So I hope that's the case. And we're getting near the end. How is everyone feeling? Donna, Jesse, Chaza?
I slept, I'm fine.
Very good.
We slept well. How
Very
are
good.
you?
That's a lovely huge mug there, Donna. Apart from mentioning maybe sort of the continuation, which is a 24 minutes of UX podcast, which will be coming back after a bit of hiatus, a bit of a break in the past months, and will be hopefully coming back in the next months. Is there anything else that we'd like to mention before we go over to the final keynote from Jonathan?
If you really love the international play goals this conference, we do also have the talks from previous years on YouTube. So if you want to continue getting this feeling of how UX works around the world, there's kind of really good content from previous years too.
Excellent thought. And before anyone asks, we will be sharing these videos in the coming probably weeks in some kind of schedule. So you will be able to rewatch, but you won't be able to ask your questions. If there's nothing else, then Jonathan, we'd like to hand over to you. So you are joining us from Singapore and we'll be talking to us around making sense of career progression. And I really like the part of it that's sort of like this making sense. I think that some sense making is quite important, and it's very funny. I teach human-centered design, not for designers at the university, and one of the exercises that I give them and that goes throughout the whole semester is to design their own career. And there are regularly people who tell me, at age, because they are at a secondary degree, they tell me at age or 40, 50 plus that I wish I had done this earlier. And funnily enough, those who are young, they don't really appreciate it as much. It's rather those who are later on. But I'm really looking forward to what your sort of making sense and sense-making process will be like. Any questions to us before we get started?
No, I'm curious to know how many coffees has we drank throughout the whole 24 hours, actually.
That is an excellent question. I'd like to see that statistics myself. That we can't tell you.
Too many lots.
Indeed, I was sticking with some tea. And with that, over to you. I'll also share your presentation here, and we will be back at the end for questions. And until then, we'll be here in the backstage if you need us for anything. So, Jonathan, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Peter. And big good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you're listening from. So thank you for tuning into my segment around just exploration of career progression, at least how I make sense of it. So before I jump in, a little bit of background. My name is Jonathan Yap. I've been a designer for past 13 years of my life. Been to different parts of the world, like half of my career is based in the UK, half of them is here. Been to agencies, startups, larger companies. Some of you might know, like WeWork and Visa. But right now, I'm leading a team of design standards in a Singaporean bank, working around frameworks to help us scale as a team. Three words I've kind of put up. The other two kind of sums it up as well. Like I'm always passionate about connecting with people, and also I'm always energized by the community. So a lot of the things I do also kind of intertwine with the community itself, both here and around Asia. But I think an easier way to remember me by is this. Well, not because I work in a bank, right? I think bank pays well, so. But in the community, I've come to be known as like the person to go to talk about money. I even have a money room in one of the discords in the community talking about this. Mainly it's because in the past few years, I've went deep into talking about pay transparency in the design industry, especially focused in the Southeast Asian region. Because I think that's something that we sorely lack around in Southeast Asia, something that we haven't really spoken about around pay transparency, coming from more like a conservative culture. So it's a different kind of space that I try to dive into. A little bit crossover with career progression, but there was some things that I am really passionate about. So let's start off from the start. Like, where did this whole thing came from? The career progression, what did it became a thing that I had to make sense of it and stuff. So I think to kind of wind back, this started as basically like purely a work project. Our team is kind of growing. Most of us have joined like within the 6 to 12 months. We're basically trying to make sense of everything. Question was brought up, right? What does growth looks like in our team? What does progression looks like in our team? So there was a starting point. My manager came over and talked to me and said, "Hey, can you look into this? Because people are starting asking questions." And like, part of my job is looking at scaling frameworks. So sure, definitely, I'm excited for it. At the same time, it's something I haven't tackled before. So it's like, this is awesome, right? As designers go into new projects, they'll be really excited about things. Start from this common starting point on looking at titles, roles and responsibilities, skills, your pathway, simple stuff. And as any project goes, scope will start to creep a little bit. There's more stuff, more questions start to pop up. How we tie into HR, promotions is coming up, like all these things are starting to kind of come in. And then I've started asking too many questions. Before you know it, everything is all over the place. And as usual, as any design project, existential crisis happens. So I don't know if this is a familiar feeling for you, but a lot of times this is where we start to question everything in life, starting from just a simple project. But, that's okay. It's part of the learning process. You try to make sense of things. You try to go out, take a walk, get some coffee, come back to it and reframe. So we start to ask around better questions to somehow the things you want to find out about. Went to community, talk to people, went to teams, talk to people, trying to get a bit more focus. So we started from right at the top, right? What is career progression on its own, right? It's in a simplistic sense, it's pretty straightforward. It's in the title. Making progress equals growth. Growth equals you get more experience, you get different exposure to more types of different work, scenarios, situations. You will start to see and observe patterns that you can kind of leverage, and that's where frameworks can come to help you in terms of tackling any kind of projects or problems, right? Experience basically gives us a lot of wisdom to this. From an individual standpoint, where does that stand? What we get out of this is, better positions, better pay, promotions. We talk about job satisfaction, reputation, we learn about skills, the list goes on and on. So pretty straightforward why we want to kind of pursue in that sense, right? So what does that look like for our business? In one word, it comes down to simple terms like profit, right? More growth equals more values, equals profit, shareholders happy, everyone kind of, dancing around in the shower with money, things like that. But at the end of the day, business do need to make money to be able to sustain, and running a business is always hard because there's too many different situations, different types of work you need to do. So it does make sense from a business standpoint to invest into people, and having that drive people's growth will actually ultimately drive impact, and ultimately help business profit. As usual, any talks will not be complete without a Venn diagram. Here's my version of a Venn diagram. So in a sense, let's be really honest here, right? Like when we go to work and when we work with people, at the end of the day, we want to be paid. Either you're chasing money or either you need to just pay the bills. When growth comes into place, money will definitely fall not too far off, right? Because that's almost like a proof of like growing. I'm not accounting to other aspects of the growth that overlaps with business, but I think ultimately what I'm just trying to highlight, it pays to actually have a plan to grow, because those pay will come back. It's a win-win situation. Yeah, get everyone's happy. But I think the one thing about career progression plan itself, right? I think that's two things that we're trying to kind of tackle here, right? It's basically trying to understand what skill set I need to grow from an individual standpoint, and also the expectation of roles and responsibility. So very clear cut. It's trying to understand from here, how do I get to the next stage? And that is just creating a kind of shared language at your workplace to, kind of create a plan and make sure we kind of can execute that according to plan. And it's tailored very specific to your team, to your nature of business, and the circumstances that your business is in, right? So we kind of have that clear idea. Okay, this is kind of what we need to tackle. Let's actually start to tackle this thing. And this is what we came up with, right? So we started to build a shared language for growth. And you can see I'm using FigJam here. If my team is here, they probably know me. I run all my meetings using FigJam, turn it into a workshop kind of style. The things that we needed to start, we started with a lot of research. So when we start with research, in terms of any kind of career progression plan, there's a ton of work that's been done out there already. I think we need to it makes sense just to leverage them and remix those frameworks rather than start from scratch and see how that can kind of tailor, right? Follow on with just seeing how your career, the career ladder looks like in your current structure. Those things have to come into play because those things exist. Design don't exist just in isolation, but we exist within an organization. And then looking for other inspiration to kind of help us drive through those, drive to how to kind of put something like a career progression plan together. Then we talk about the usual stuff. This is something that people care about a lot these days. The IC, the individual contributor track and management track. So we looked at that. Then we looked at every single level of this and the skill set that goes into it. We look into a little bit of how we evaluate as well in terms of each of the skill set and the level itself. Lots of writing, more than I'm comfortable with. Did loads and loads of stuff around this, and we did a lot of iteration on this with collaborate and get feedback from our team itself. So lots of review. What it did look like is this, basically. We have, let me just make sure that this shows up correctly. We end up with a giant table. I'm not sharing the details. This doesn't make sense to show it to you right here, but the details is basically, this is what we came up with. To answer those two key questions, we actually leverage the same language that was used from Figma. So we looked into a lot of different types of career progression plan. We really liked the language that was used in the Figma career progression plan. So we took a lot of the language, but we added a different track to it, the management path, right? So from an individual contributor standpoint, the ones over the top, we care about things like product strategy, craft, communication, collaboration, action, and leveling up others and independence. But on the management track, we basically try and align those two because the work kind of aligns. So instead of talking about specific product strategy, we're talking more about the vision and overall picture, the big picture stuff. And in terms of craft, management track won't be focusing more on doing the stuff, but we want to encourage people to practice. And then communication and collaboration, same. So that's cutting across. Support and impact. We're not actually shipping stuff, but we're trying to get enough support, whether we spend enough time on it, do we have the right resources on it, do we have the right people, do we even have the right skill set, or the hiring stuff that goes into this. Then goes into leveling up others, making sure we have crit in place, mentorship in place, and peer coaching in place. And lastly, for IC standpoint, doing stuff independently. From a management side, we want to switch gears and talk about more creating a sense of community. How do we create identity? Are we promoting our teams enough? Attracting the right talent, and so on and so forth. So we laid out kind of this is basically our skills rubrics. And then how we did was we also kind of clean up a little bit in our titles because banking title is always kind of skewed, the corporate titles. So we wanted to kind of level that playing ground that ties in a little bit closer to the rest of the industry. So we kind of have that 2-track of written down as well. So everything is kind of clear and out in the open. And we looked at basically 4 quadrants of how we assess in terms of evaluation. So someone at any level can make contribution or impact at all, any 4 of this thing around project, with people, with teams, and organization. And what we want to do is create more of an evidence-based assessment and see like how do you actually bring evidence that show that contribute to specific impact to the team, or to projects, or to helping others. So that's kind of like we're not kind of fully there yet because it's still fairly new. We haven't gone through a fully tested out assessment, but I'll let you know in maybe 12 months time. But what this actually did for us when we actually shared the full plan with the team is it actually helped us keep a little bit more in sync. And the assessment criteria became very clear. And we managed to test this out in interviews. And this is where we started to actually go in and bring in the same level of skill set, the skills rubrics, and assess our candidates. And it's pretty interesting to see the shift from talking about just bullet points, pros and cons. Now we have a very clear-cut shared language that we can talk about within our teams when we assess candidates. And it's kind of like a learning process for us. We did have to go back and forth a lot, like going back to the books. Okay, this is the right thing, referring, but it's something that we're kind of learning and trying to sort out and get it done, practice a little bit more. So all in all, great, right? Job done. Nailed that career progression plan. All done. Thank you. That's it, right? Right? Once you have a plan, you should get that promotion. But I think this is where things get a little bit interesting when I started talking to people outside, and when I hear a lot of mentees coming to me talking about asking about career plans, talking about how do we make progress, how do we actually get into spaces, get into teams, and the same feedback that early on someone mentioned that not everyone really plan out their career, especially when they're younger. We always have this thing like a fuzzy logic around planning our careers. It's only when we feel like, oh, we need that promotion or we're shifting jobs, then we look into it and start questioning things. But when in a nutshell, in terms of designing a career plan for one work, our careers itself don't actually end in one place. Well, not anymore. So how do you start to bring this into a place where you can actually scale between teams, between companies, and go with you wherever you go in your career, right? How do you manage across all of them? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and look at some of the odds some of the odd things that happen in the career progression itself. So when I start to say this, like when I ask you to picture this, metaphorically speaking, what image would come up when you talk about career progression? And you can feel free to drop it in the chat, though I'm not going to wait for it because I'm running a bit of time. But most of the time when you talk about career progression, this kind of things would come up. Some sort of step, some sort of ladder, some sort of upward trajectory. Now this is interesting because how our minds usually correlate progress is always with upward trajectory. If we're not making any progress and we're moving up, we're not making any progress. And it definitely always kind of punishes when we do stray off the track, right? If we are switching careers, jumping into something completely new, which is why a lot of careers switches always struggle with. Like we have this whole idea, this fixation around like moving up equals growth in our mind. But the thing is, with a lot of these different types of exposure to the different experiences and situations, we start to kind of become too obsessed with just looking at levels, titles, brands of companies, and focus on the things that that looks nice on a profile, right? And when I talk and when I spoke to some of these mentees, they talk to me and like, oh yeah, I'm struggling to get even an interview in with companies because they require us to have tech experience and we don't, right? And one very good example is at two that came through, which was a firefighter and a police officer. And when you talk to them about these, and when they actually started to talk about their work and they presented, a lot of these things can be reframed and reskilled into tackling design because, talking about police investigation, all these things, they have a lot of discipline around life and death situation. They have to be properly trained. You talk to them about investigating a crime. Those are tough research piece, and you bring it to our world of research of like, oh, how many people are converting in our buttons, like it gives a very, very big contrast. So what happens with this kind of thing is when we have that upward trajectory, we always overlook potential, and different kind of exposure to situations that can be applied into even our field itself, and yeah, even titles, right? As a hiring manager itself, I do take shortcuts as well. I look at titles, look at profiles, what fits our wish list. But recognizing that biases really doesn't help, especially when we talk about just looking, trying to beat the system of like getting into the recruiter's inbox. We try to game that system, looking at just having titles in the right place. But the other context of the people is often overlooked. So with titles itself, let's talk about titles itself, the leveling in the industry. From a simple, like starting from the ground up, it should look pretty straightforward, right? Junior, midweight, senior. And as you go, you have a lot more different types of titles that pop up, different tracks that you go into, the IC versus management track. But the thing is, the title doesn't always have an indication of whether someone have the right experience or have a capacity, because in reality, it could probably look like this, right? And when was the last time, if you look into someone's job profile and you say like, this person's only been doing design for 2 years, but they have a lead position because they're in a startup or because they're a team of one, right? And I'll point out, like, our bank's also very notorious for giving things like vice president positions to people who are coming up new. So again, titles have no indication of capability and skill set. And you mix that up with all the fancy titles last time, you get all these crazy stuff, and people start caring about things that doesn't matter. And I'm guilty of that as well, especially when I was younger. I was like, can I put a name to myself? Can I gonna give catchy catchphrase so that, don't get overlooked, and look nicer on a profile, and people are like, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. And then going back the previous one of like the lateral movement across different types of practice and industry itself, we also have a problem with calling what we call our industry, right? UX design, product design, service experience. There are some more clear cut, some not so much. But again, like, does it make sense when we go and talk to companies? Their definition of UX design, is it actually UX design, or is it they just want someone to execute more like a visual or graphic person? These become a lot harder to measure and a lot harder to gauge. So nobody really knows what's going on. It's a wild west of titles. But we did make some progress. It's no wonder when we have so many different titles, a lot of times we do feel like an imposter, because does it actually make sense? If we hear enough rejection, you tell yourself enough times, you might have the imposter coming up. So in a nutshell, titles, experience, progression, there's no one-to-one kind of definition. We don't have an ISO standard for this. There's no universal definition. Couple that with the complexity of language, people who have native speaking versus non-native, and how we translate skill sets across, it becomes a little bit harder to figure things out. And I think the obsession with titles, the obsession with leveling, and just profile itself, it's always kind of make us forget like the people behind them that actually could have the potential to actually do what we need them to do and help us progress to the next level. So what do you do with career progression plan? Should we actually have them or not, right? If it's not career. So anyway, having said all these stuff, right, for the plan itself, I think there's a benefit to having them within your organization, because as I mentioned earlier on, what we're trying to do is basically create a shared language that can be understood within the organization. But I think what I want to kind of point out is we can't hold this too closely, that once a career progression is defined, that it's how you basically define your entire life and your entire career, which I want to explore something that's a little bit outside of just career progression plan itself. And if you look at something that's very interesting, this is a research piece from Pew Research last year around like why people actually leave jobs. You can see the top two. This is general, by the way. So this is just trying to make a point of like people do leave jobs because they're not getting paid enough, or they don't see any progression in their career plan. So now what's actually very interesting to see is when you zoom out and zoom down and look at the other half of all the things that we're talking about. A lot of these things don't really have much to do with career progression. No, career itself, right? The professional lives itself. And I wanted to actually paint a picture that the boundaries starts to overlap because there are a lot of things that happen outside of work can affect work and vice versa. So it's not always just about the work. So I want to actually switch gears a little bit here because talking about work and going to the personal side, I have a kind of personal interest. I recently, past couple of years, came across this study of ontology, which is a subset of psychology, which talk about concept of existence, being, reality, all the existential crisis kind of questions. And go into a little bit how we are talking about making progress in our lives. So just a very typical kind of week. I'm basing it out of 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of work, and 8 hours of other things, and 16 hours of on the weekend. Numbers are round up just to make it easy, but our life definitely doesn't look like this. Just to paint a picture, that we spent a quarter of a week at work, and 1/3 of the time we're basically sleeping. But there's another big chunk that of our life happened outside of work. So and it's interesting. It correlates to how the data works. When people talk about why they actually left and move on to different careers and move on from jobs, is they actually talk about a lot of reasons that happen outside of work, right? And then this is where you start to see growth. When you talk about growth itself, career, it's just one aspect of powerful picture, one aspect of the whole thing. And the next bit is I want to ask, how many of you have actually heard of any of these phrases before when you are working in your life? And funny enough, about 2 weeks ago, I chat to a friend. She basically told me this one of the phrase, don't take it personally, was actually mentioned to her in front of her face. So I think the context of these conversations are very important. But I think a lot of times we talk to people and we use these kind of phrases, it's about trying to create some sort of separation between the personal and work, don't let the work, personal life affect work. We want to make sure you do well at your job. But it's very hard for most people to do well in just compartmentalizing work and personal life. Work-life balance topic comes up. So what is interesting is a lot of your personal life carries through to your work, and how you show up at work and can also affect how you do at home, right? Take, for example, if you have gotten a good night's rest, right? You're going to show up work fresh, ready to go, compared to a very long night out, drinking with friends. That could be very different. And the same thing for work, right? If someone who's earning at a minimum wage, I can definitely tell you in their personal life, they constantly be thinking about decisions that they make. It'll be constantly on edge, right? And this is, and I want to share a story. This is a very personal story that how this happens to me in my life itself. And the cool thing about this is the 24 hours of UX, the topic is me, we, us. And on theme to this, it's a story about we over me. And this is a phrase that was said a lot to us at WeWork. So the whole WeWork story. So I was seen through that whole IPO implosion and the craziness of where you heard on podcasts or movies and things like that. So this was back in November. And WeWork's basically at a hypergrowth stage, attempt to an IPO, but it blew up because the thing kind of looked ridiculous, and shareholders are losing confidence at company being able to execute. The burn rate is killing us basically, and all in all, everyone in the company was thinking about, like, will I actually have a job? Will I actually have a company to go back to tomorrow? And I was actually based in Singapore, and our team was actually doing fairly well in terms of pushing out, making impact, and doing things. But I think with all the things that are going on in the background, time and time again, we just had to say, like, yeah, we are okay. We've got to focus. We know we had a lot of distraction. I had to stand in front of a room of 15 people trying to say, like, we're okay. Because we are doing well and we're doing important stuff. So just keep your heads down, focus on work, you'll be okay, right? Truth to be told, I was personally not okay. And I did make it out and say, like, I'm feeling very vulnerable at this point as well, because during this time, I was also expecting our second child. And yeah, and I was actually sitting on the November 21st of November. I was actually sitting in a hospital room, waiting for the arrival of my newborn. My wife went through 20 hours of labor, so really champion woman. Really grateful for having her as a partner. We went through that, but at the same time, I couldn't be present, fully present. Because on 21st of November, that was the day that we've got news that rescue plan came true. Company will exist past tomorrow, past next week, but at the cost of a massive layoff. So all my friends, all the people I was checking Slack, I was on like different news sites, checking blind, like people were getting meeting invites, they're told to pack up and leave. Luckily, our team wasn't as affected as much as the folks in the US. But yeah, again, a lot of these people that I've come to know and work closely with had to leave. It tore me apart, right, during that time, like having to see people go. And I was basically stuck in this hard place of, like, I'm supposed to be happy and waiting for my son to come out, but I have to endure all these things that was coming out from the other side of the world. So in a way, I definitely feel incredibly robbed of that moment. And, I think in that sense, I have every right to be angry at people, right? For this to be happening. But out of that hardship, I think, which is where when you can actually manage personal hardship, you overcome that. And that is, you see a tremendous growth, right? How work actually impacts your personal life and how personal life impacts your work. Nothing can change the fact that all these things have happened. But at the same time, before this, I really struggled with having my personal voice out there. I was always shy on the reserved seat of, like, should I actually put myself out there, right? But this actually pushed me through the door and say, like, look, I think I can I can be part of this and help some people. So if I can, I should speak up. And I think this is where I started to discover my voice a little bit better, and start to be more open and talk about this and voicing support, which actually fuel a lot of the things around, like, the Design Pay Asia initiative that I was doing around pay transparency. This was actually one of the tipping point that actually got me to, just say, screw it, let's just do it. And having done that, and people have come back and say, like, it did help them through really tough times, because when I started the whole thing, it was going through COVID. Everyone was going through similar situations of, like, massive layoff. In Asia as well, like, we don't have data and resources to help people being taken advantage of. This was a place where it started to help. And I wanted to bring out one interesting field, which is called organizational development, or OD for short, which generally talks about intervention and influencing systems. This is how you design organization structure to be effective. But if you look at how the systems that are in play and what are things that are in play, and you look at the very bottom piece of this, right? The intrapersonal part of thing, and you point out that the individual, you yourself as a person, it's already a complex system of one on its own. Actually having the awareness of where things kind of start and how that can influence other things actually are really, really beneficial to people. So before you actually start to influence other system at play, start with yourself, right? The best place to start, to change the many different things, their systems, best place to start is yourself. My two sons are at home, so they're kind of having fun in the background. If you hear them chattering, that's just them. And we come up to this place, this Japanese concept of living called ikigai. Iki means basically life in Japanese, and gai means value or worth. But what this actually means is the whole concept of ikigai is talking about a sense of being alive, having motive to live, the purpose and meaning in your own kind of personal, your life itself, right? Ikigai is back again. Now I'm pointing a very different kind of visual, because usually when you post it out, that's using the that crazy Venn diagram. But this was a very interesting, Professor Akihiro talks about this from a sense of like the Venn diagram is often misinterpreted, and this is a kind of better representation of what ikigai is. So there's a lot of sense of things that affect how you get to achieve like feeling of ikigai itself. Talking about the sense of control, existence, and things like that. But and if you look at the one on the left, or the objects that affect it, career is not really there, but you can interpret it, the role as your role in jobs, position, family. That could be interpreted as part of how that could influence. Right? And look at all that part. It's actually a very small part of it. So if you zoom out in the grand scheme of things, your career growth is actually very, very small part of your personal growth, right? In your whole growth as a person. And the one thing that I definitely want to highlight in this whole piece of, OD and all these things is, I wanted to mention that the growth is something that's very personal. And your career is, again, something that's very personal to you. There's no reason for us to go in and start comparing titles. There's no reason to kind of talk about those things, because those are all very small part of the equation. Those titles don't actually define your self-worth. It's the same person that you actually bring to work, and the same person that you bring from work to home. How you actually have achieved growth around those will affect you as a person, and getting you closer to your purpose, your grand purpose in life, whichever that is. And if you have discovered that, great. If not, it is a ongoing pathway to get to that stage. So whatever that you do in your own personal life, in your life in general, if you enrich it, that will definitely enrich other aspects of your life. Personal, work, with family, with friends, with your community. So coming to this whole thing about, pulling everything a little bit back, how do you actually bring this together and apply it to work? Like, this whole sense of purpose, trying to discover and trying to make sense of things. What's a practical way to actually use this, right? So I'm going to give you 3 things that I feel like it works very well for me, and in the past talking to different people about this. And you can basically start with these 3 things to help you. And I think before that, you already heard a lot of different parts of growth and talk about how we achieve growth with the different speakers. So you can definitely mix that into the picture. But I'm going to start off with the first thing that's very simple, is talking to yourself. Well, you can actually go up and have a conversation in front of a mirror if you want to. But I think it's very good to have that discussion, that internal dialogue inside of you. And as we see, you as a person, as a complex system of one already. You want to try and make sense of where things are, the language that you've been using, the body and the postures, how you kind of position yourself, the emotions that you're encountering at work, in personal life, at situations, doing design, doing research. How does those things come into play, right? Now, the very key point, like I think, is you start asking yourself questions, because you yourself, you're basically trying to convince a stakeholder, and the stakeholder is you, right? And the person you're starting to ask questions to is, when you hear those conversations happening inside of your head, is it actually you that's speaking, or is it the imposter that's speaking, right? The imposter syndrome, the negative self-talk, or is this actually something that's that you need to improve on? And how you actually try to decipher the two is get a feedback, get a data. Those are basically your friend. But actually, feedback and data feedback itself is actually just data. You can choose to give power to it, and how you act upon it, it's up to you. Someone can come to me and basically say, "Hey, Jonathan, your talk shit. Like, it's crappy." I can choose to act upon it. I can choose to position how I position. I can let it affect me as much as I can. Like, oh, like I'm not a great speaker, but at the same time, you can also act upon it and say, like, hey, maybe follow up questions like, oh, great, thank you for sharing that. Like, what do you think the areas I can improve? What are the places that I've lost you, right? So having that conversation with yourself, bring that outwards and start using those same questions that's in your head. Bring it up to people, talk to people, get that feedback, decide on how you want to act upon it. That's the first kind of field to help you start to understand, how to make that jump. The second part of it is, I hope it's okay. Second part of it, this is something that I find personally really effective. Is setting up personal learning goals. I've been telling to everybody and every mentees that I have, is when you actually start with your personal, like set up some personal learning goals, start to ask yourself some questions around, what you want to learn, what you're currently curious about, what do you want to work on. Start with those questions, and suddenly you have a very, very long list of things. Starting a long list of questions that you kind of answer, and you can start to prioritize and see, like, oh, maybe these are the things that I want to really learn to help me grow, right? Now, the very cool part is when you start to make personal learning goals, they are very personal to you, right? The work and the stake. And when you align that to work, and with the work goals itself, like trying to get product X out, to product Y out, trying to improve performances at work, you can actually start to tie something that's personal there. And what it actually gives you is it gives you more stake into doing the work itself. Like, if I'm actually trying to create this product and getting it out of the door, what I'm actually learning. A good example is when I started to talk about design crit at work. It's also where I wanted to grow my voice and speak a little bit better, have a bit more clarity and thought leadership around things. So that basically overlaps with design critique, and it helped me as a person to grow my voice. At the same time, it will benefit the others that are with the same design critique with me. Definitely time box it. Make sure that the cool thing about having personal learning goals, if you time box this thing, it gives you a bit of urgency as well, and not dragging your feet. But I think the other aspect is to make yourself more comfortable to failing at that point, right? If you set yourself up like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whichever way you want to frame it, if I didn't achieve that in 3 months, what happens? And then we can look at why. Like, why didn't those things happen? Why didn't I achieve what I was set out to do? Why didn't I manage to answer the goals? And then when you start to reframe that into a little bit more focus on learning, suddenly you're practicing dealing with failures. And, it becomes more of a habit. You start to go like, oh, instead of failing, like, yeah, what did I need to learn in that situation? And lastly, always have a retrospective. Like once you've done that, that's where actually the learning happens. And the cool thing about having time box is the 3 months checking period of time. You can do, say, this usual start, stop, continue. And whether if you want to continue learning in this pathway, whether if you want to actually stop, I've got what I need to do something else. Perfect point, right? To gonna do that. And the last piece I want to kind of share is basically talking about giving growth a voice. So journaling is a good exercise to kind of do this. So this is a tip from another friend who talk about documenting your progress. So having a win or fail list will actually help you remember better in terms of the situations, the experience you went through, and the struggles. I think it's also helpful to have emotions in them if you actually write them down. So I actually have a personal win, fail list. Then I have like, oh, how am I feeling in that situation when it happens? Why do I actually feel that? It helps me to practice a lot more in terms of just documenting things in time. And it's also helping you with the story that you want to tell next, right? So it actually telling your story, it's much easier when you have a list of things to refer back to. This is the thing where a lot of designers, when they talk about putting together a portfolio, they struggle like, oh my goodness, this is the hardest thing ever I need to do, but I need to do it because I need to get a job. If you do that in progress, it will make the effort a little bit easier. And this will actually help you better tell that story and reframe it into a story of like personal achievement, personal growth. And the things that will stood out usually in any kind of portfolio or hiring manager situation is those aspects will stand out a lot more compared to your portfolio case study of checklists of I did research, affinity mapping, persona, check, right? And this is where we talk about storytelling. Same thing as if you're trying to get a promotion, having that story and evidence will help you progress, have a much easier conversation with your manager. Because you're basically doing all the work upfront and say like, hey, I've done all these bunch of great stuff. I feel like I'm ready for the next level, right? And then your hiring manager, your manager would be like, okay, great. I can make a strong case because you already put that case for me. And I can put my own language around this and try to help push through some of these conversations. And lastly, craft is a fantastic medium of storytelling. We often overlook our own craft and how those things can influence people. And so the things that you do at work, your craft, pushing out things, the pixels itself, the deliverables, those are all fantastic pieces of medium that you can help put that story together. So use those as a straight show of like evidence and things like that. Use those to kind of flash up that moment and then tell the underlying story behind it. So that will actually help you carry your voice out a bit better. Lastly, I think as growth is something that's very personal and your career is very personal, this is just a call out to go out, share your story, share your personal journey, talk to people, talk to community, paint a picture of how career isn't like a linear path. It's not a stairs to go up and to climb. Talk about things that could go wrong, things that have went wrong, and how you overcome that. Because at the end of the day, the growth story that we want to tell is how we basically overcome a lot of these hardship and hurdles that gives us experience. And that could be outside of just work. It could be even in your personal life and how that could bring into the table. And I'm leaving you with this last piece from the Woke Salaryman. It's a fantastic group of folks that create comics for financial literacy in Singapore. And I've put this snippet up from them in their recent kind of like, achieving financial independence. A great story piece there. But it talks about, people, you are the best person to own your decisions, to own your happiness, right? You have that answer to that. So you should definitely own your decision to get you to the path that you want to go to. At the end of the day, so how does that look like for you? What does your progress, your career, your purpose in life looks like? Share the story. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I have here a career letter that I quickly acquired while you were talking. Let's
Fantastic.
The others on the stream as well.
Oh, I love it.
Jonathan, I'm beginning to see a trend here. Let me bring Jesse up as well. I'm beginning to see a trend here because last year we also had a speaker from Asia, and he also was using a lot of memes, and his talk was also awesome. So I think we should make this a regular thing. And thank you very much for the introduction and for the sort of really insightful talk. That I saw there were people who were learning about UX 20 years ago, writing like, "Hey, I'm still learning stuff." So really, really good, really great. There's definitely stuff that I sort of wrote up and will be taking away from this as well. Anyone else with any thoughts before I look up any questions from the stage?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to say, like, thank you for having me in this conversation as well. Like, I think Shaza was the one that brought me in initially, and she was the one that I actually talked to. She was the feedback for a lot of the community career plan that I was trying to help put together. And I think
So
that was
no good deeds go unpunished, Jonathan.
yeah, no, your feedback helped, like the understanding how you looked at it as well gave me a different type of language, and yeah, that basically spiraled me off into like a another existential crisis kind of situation. It's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? That's real. But thank you.
On a daily basis, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you so much for having me, everyone, like Peter, Shaza, Jesse.
Our pleasure. So we have two quick questions. One is it wrong, from Anonymous, is it wrong to not have aspiration to become a lead UX designer after working 20 years as a designer? How do people judge if you don't have this title on your LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I mean, I think that question is best answered by yourself. Like, what would you be doing if you're not doing design or UX, right? And this is another part of that's personal to me. Is like when I started out with design career, I always have this idea that I will end up somewhere in education rather than design. But the thing is, I don't know how to get there. So my personal explorations, like I have the general direction. I don't know if we need to look at some point I would transition out. So I don't know if you have that titles would actually help you going to that path. If it does, great. If not, then that's fine as well, right? Having that goal that you want to go to, like finding that purpose, and help you kind of drive towards that. You find all the other things that are more meaningful, rather than just getting hung up on titles. Because at the end of the day, titles will definitely change. Who knows what we're going to call next year or 2 years, 5 years down the line.
Indeed. And there's a lot of organizations like CERN or Google where you can sort of pick a path. You can either pick a path that takes you up a ladder, or you can choose a path that takes you lateral and just dig deeper into things. And you could be a vice president with 0 people reporting to you, but being the authority on a specific topic. So it's something that large organizations have realized, that seniority doesn't necessarily result in management roles or anything like that, nor does it necessarily need to manifest in getting more specific. Just doing what you like is also something that fits. And then the last question, I have encountered this problem quite often, that a business team can always override and change design decisions. How can we as UX designers find our value in this working environment? From Mia Zhang.
Oh, that's always a tough question, but fantastic question. If you look back, I think Mackenzie did a great study on this piece when talking about the value of design and how that works. And this is another thing that I've learned from someone who came from data scientist background, is trying to tell that story that relates to the person that you're talking to. How do they understand language? And for business, very simple terms. If you talk about the language of business, talk about dollars and cents. If you start to quantify your problems, your design problems in numbers, it's, suddenly people will start to pay attention. You frame that into like, oh, if we don't solve this, this is something that design can actually help you solve. But if you don't solve it, we will spend X amount of people's time, Y amount of dollars on this. You multiply that, suddenly it becomes $1 million problem. You bring $1 million problems into a boardroom, no one's going to say no. They're going to start paying attention. So you start from there.
There was someone last year who mentioned that if you feel that you're not being taken sort of seriously or enough into consideration as a designer, then become a product manager and basically, try to do the same role, but just transition into an area which you feel is being taken more serious. So that might be a bit more cynicism or realism. You can decide for yourself, but that's also a way. Any other parting thoughts from anyone else? If not, Jonathan, thank you very much. It was an excellent wrap up for the event. It was really, really good. And so long, and thanks for all the fish to everyone who stuck with us either for an hour or maybe 24. So for a few more minutes, I think we'll sort of battle ourselves to stay awake. So we do have a session which we opened up just now. If you go over into sessions, the very first session is called Post-Event Chill. And at least I myself will go in there, and I hope all the other organizers as well. And there's plenty of other organizers who are not on the stage right now for some reason. Steph, Seth, Ahmad, and Keith. If you hear us guys, then yeah, thank you very much. I feel myself as if we ran a marathon, but with everyone running through the finish line holding hands together. So that's what this felt like for me. It was really, I think, one of the best content and best sort of organization of the 24 hours of UX that we made. And this is all due to the speakers and the audience. So thank you very much. And with that, go ahead. Sorry, Jesse.
I just said thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Indeed. So
my pleasure. Thank you.
I shall close I shall press the stop broadcast button. My hand is trembling. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you soon at 24 Hours of UX next year, and with other initiatives in between that time and now. How do you say it, Jesse? And we'll keep calm and UX on.
Keep calm and UX on.
Thank you all.